The member for Mallee, Anne Webster, joins us again. Anne, safely back in your electorate after a pretty robust first couple of sitting weeks for the federal parliament.
Yes, indeed they were, and Labor are still quite intent on holding the previous government to blame for everything that's going pear-shaped right now. I'm thinking that their time is running out in being able to do that. You know, nearly 10 months into office, they really have full remit for the responsibility for everything that's going on currently.
Now, let's track through something that happened during the last Parliament, the Regional Banking Task Force. I noticed that you and a number of your National Party colleagues put up a press conference, and I think Gerard Rennick, the LNP senator, moved for a fresh inquiry in the Senate. Whatever the cause of it was, we saw the Commonwealth Bank and Westpac backtracking on their regional bank closures for the time being. Just talk us through how this all happened.
Well, Gerard and Matt Canavan both put up that proposal and for another inquiry. Obviously, the Banking Task Force, which came to Mallee actually last year and had a hearing here, had come up with recommendations that banks should have an impact assessment done in each community where they want to close branches. And that was agreed by the ABA, the Big Four, and was due to come into effect in July 2023. What we have in the interim period is 92 closures. Doesn't sound like it's full of integrity to me. Anyway, I happened to meet with the Westpac government lobbyist in that first week of the 2-week sitting and said to him what was going on in Robinvale, because of course we've got the Westpac had come out and said that they would be closing. ANZ had already said they would be closing in Robinvale, which only leaves the CommBank. I proposed a few options to that government lobbyist, which he was very interested in, and I am very pleased to say, obviously I've done some media on it, as had my colleagues, and CommBank and Westpac have now said that they will put a moratorium on, as requested, until the inquiry is completed. That's our understanding. December 1st, the inquiry should report. So it looks like we have a bit of reprieve in this space, except the NAB and ANZ have not stepped up unless they've done so in the last half hour, and I haven't.
Well, I've got something from the ANZ. It actually came through over the weekend. Their spokesperson said the ANZ remains committed to engaging constructively with the committee and will postpone announcing any further closures of regional branches until the conclusion of the inquiry in December. So they're a me too with the Commonwealth and the Westpac, but that leaves the NAB sort of swinging at the moment.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I'm pleased to hear that. I hadn't heard that. Very pleasing. And, one can only hope that the NAB will see the sense and the moral obligation to do the right thing by regional communities. My argument has long been that regional communities contribute substantially to GDP. Mallee, for example, is $14 billion. Please don't sneeze at that, big banks. Take it seriously and be respectful of the smaller communities who need some kind of solution, even if it is a joint, and this is what I suggested to the Westpac lobbyist or government relations person, that the Big Four could pay the salary of one banking teller in these small communities to perhaps work at the Australia Post, but provide that knowledgeable and face-to-face service that particularly our older population really, really appreciate. Yeah. And look, even in the process of all of this, I've heard plenty of young people who don't want to do online banking.
Now, just before we throw that bouquet too close to the ANZ, I just want to clarify further detail the fine print in the statement. Branch closures they announced last year and that were in the final stages will proceed, given they believe delaying those long-planned closures would be more disruptive to customers and staff. You'd know the Robinvale history a bit more than us. Where does that leave them?
Well, my understanding was, and I could be wrong on this because I actually wasn't briefed on it at the time, but my understanding was that they had made the announcement back in December to close in May. So I think that's still, let's wait and see. I've certainly received nothing from them to say, okay, we'll leave Robinvale open.
We'll get that detail to your office afterwards, Anne, just so you can pick through that with the ANZ. You mentioned Australia Post just now, the possibility of maybe embedding a bank staff or someone who used to work at a bank at an Australia Post. We're looking forward to speaking to Australia Post later this week. But Anna Bligh from the Banking Association you mentioned earlier, representing the big four banks, she talked up Australia Post as an alternative, but wouldn't Australia Post branches in regional areas need a fairly big refit or change up so that you could have a confidential banking discussion at an Australia Post counter?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And Bank at Post is not the solution that we're looking for. People have complained to me that those who work the post office in all of these regional towns are generally worked off their feet, and they don't have expertise in the banking sector. They also don't have the confidentiality component necessarily embedded, and therefore people do not feel comfortable with going to any old Australia Post and talking about their personal bank transactions or their loans or their bequests or whatever they want to talk about. So I think more needs to be done, and I agree there needs to be an investment by the Big Four into regional community post offices to provide that privacy and the opportunity to talk one-on-one with a bank teller who has the experience and expertise.
Yeah, I can imagine people of the older generation might be a bit nervous talking about their term deposit, especially if the figure gets discussed at an Australia Post counter when they're trying to maybe keep that under the hat.
That's exactly right. And, the big banks need to respect smaller communities and those who live in smaller communities. So, I would just like them to pause and reflect, and a moratorium is a way to do that. The inquiry, I hope, will bring out lots of options and solutions for the banks to consider. I did note on your interview with Anna Bligh that she said, tens of thousands of people are going online. Well, that might be true, but I guarantee you it tends to be younger people and in the city rather than those in regional communities.
Yeah, there is a bit of data she threw at us that we do need to pick a bit further back through about the declining footprint of people moving through regional branches, because it does seem maybe there's a little bit more that needs to be investigated there. I think someone had suggested maybe people were already being issued with BSBs for the regional centres branch rather than their local branch, which skews the figures somewhat.
That's right. That's exactly right. And they need to be upfront and honest with local communities. And I think that was the point of the Banking Task Force findings and recommendations, that the impact assessments should be taking place in the communities with the stakeholders, and that needs to be respected.
Now, just on another one, we noticed that the black spot targeted funding was announced, and I'm always wary of this word targeted when it's used in politics. It usually means that those that we want to get the money, and you're concerned that that's exactly what's happened with Labor with the latest black spot funding.
I don't know, Ricky. How can you be so cynical? Seriously.
Been around long enough.
Yeah, right. No, 74% of the locations that Labor have chosen, 74% are in Labor electorates. And out of 54 locations, 74% of them. So, this is when Labor only holds 33% of electorates outside metropolitan areas. Let's remember that Labor are, generally speaking, city or inner regional, rather than out in the regions where black spot mobile coverage is desperately needed. And they've not chosen one site in Mallee. And in New South Wales, I note that 25 out of 26 of the mobile black spot targeted areas are Labor seats. I mean, it's very difficult not to be cynical and to not want to use that word hypocrisy, because they've had a pretty good slam at the Nationals over the last few years about our targeted funding for sporting facilities, and need I go on. And yet here we are, 25 out of 26 locations are Labor.
Well, shouldn't it be concerning for Labor that when you vote Labor, your mobile signal gets worse? Isn't that the implication of this funding grant?
Well, that's an angle. I'm not sure that it's the true angle, but it is an angle, and you just want to see that Labor actually walk the talk, because they're pretty good at lambasting everybody else for doing the wrong thing and favouring our electorates. And here they are, clear as day. The very first mobile black spot program, which should go to regional communities, has actually gone to Labor electorates.
Well, and that's where I remember the criticism from Catherine King, the Transport and Infrastructure Minister, when she was in opposition, criticising the Building Better Regions grants process and the spreadsheets that might have enabled some to push their case that they could get a grant that they might not have otherwise got, or that was the claim. And yet here they are. It does appear that very soon afterwards it's just a bit of sort of squaring up, as you might have seen in the old days on the footy field.
Well, I think it's just same old. Listen to what we say, don't watch what we do, because you might catch us out. I just find it appalling. When I spoke to Catherine King in her office in the first week back to talk about specific infrastructure programs that we had already approved and were on the roll, concerningly, the costs for those projects have gone up 60%. Pretty well across Australia. So very difficult to deliver a project when the costs have gone up 60%. Either way, she says to me that the next infrastructure grant rounds will have a bipartisan committee that looks through all of the applications. I thought, sounds good. Let's see if that actually happens.
Absolutely. We'll also see if we get a response from Communications Minister Michelle Rowland. We have reached out about some of those criticisms you're making, and we'll see whether they have a response about whether Labor is just playing politics, as you suggest. And Webster, the member for Mallee, thanks so much for joining us again today.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Ricky.